Today we're going to be learning Megillah Daf Yud Bet. We're going to get to a lot of interesting drashot on the Megillah. Many of them you're actually familiar with, and you'll see them inside, and you'll see where they get them from. And again, another interesting daf. Today's daf is sponsored by Shandi Kurzman in honor of the yahrzeit of her mother, Rivka Bat Harav Simcha Bunim, this Shabbat, 21 of Tevet. My youngest sister, who lives in Neve Daniel, and I, who live in Muncie, have just found out this week, after 2 years, that both of us have been learning Daf Yomi since the beginning of the cycle. And we could picture our mother asking us to share what we are learning, just as she had done when we were growing up in our childhood home. May our learning be a zchut for the aliyah of our mother's neshama. Today's daf is also sponsored anonymously in memory of the Rambam Moshe ben Maimon on his yahrzeit. Okay, we're going to start at the very top of the daf, but to just do a quick review, because it was quite complicated, all the numbers at the end of yesterday's daf. So what we ended with, and I actually want to correct one small thing, we were talking about how Balshitzal counted the 70 years from the beginning of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, and that's because it said, Milot Shiv'im Libavel. Okay, we're going to get back to later these two verses that I quoted and didn't really talk about, which is, one said 70 years to Bavel, that was in Yirmiyahu, and in Daniel it says 70 years to Churvot Yerushalayim. And they seem to be saying different things, and how do we reconcile that? We'll deal with that today. But he started counting from the 45 of Nebuchadnezzar, the 23 of Avil Merodach, and then another two of Belshazzar, and said, oh, my third year, that must be the end of 70 years. Then we said, Shiur said, I'm not going to make the same mistake. I'm going to count from the Galut of Yehoiachim, which is the earlier exile before they exiled all of the Jews from Judea. And from that, he basically cuts off 8 years and pushes everything 8 years forward, which becomes in the third year of his reign. Then we say, but the real count starts from the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, okay, which is 26 years then of Nebuchadnezzar, because 45 minus 19 is 26. Then you have 20. Now, here comes the thing where the Gemara had to say at the end there, Rava said, Shanim Mekuta'ot hayu. Has to be there was an overlap of years. And here's where I said a little bit wrong. What they really mean is that Nebuchadnezzar and Avil Merodach overlapped by a year. So instead of 26 and 23, getting you to 49, it's really 26 and 22. Okay, so those years get kind of pushed together. Belshazzar ends up ruling really only 2 years because his third year was already the next king. And Daryavish and Koresh end up 4 years altogether instead of 5. One was 2, one was 3 years. But again, there was an overlap of the years. So again, if we go through the years, we have 26 plus 22, that gets you to 48. That's Nebuchadnezzar and Avil Merodach from the time of the exile, the complete exile in Tzidkiyahu's time. 2 years of Belshazzar, that gets you to 50. This was on the sheet from yesterday. Daryavish and Koresh altogether are 4. That gets you to 54. Achashverosh is 14. That gets you to 68. 2 years into Daryavish, the second Daryavish, that's already 70 years. And that's when they go back and rebuild the temple. Okay, so that's our actual count. So now the Gemara says, Tanya Nami Hachi, and we're going to further prove this because it says in a Braita, Ve'od shana acheret lebavel va'amad Daryavish v'hishlima. Okay, this is talking about Daryavish the first. Okay, and what it's saying is that also there was another year of Bavel that Belshazzar missed. In other words, he counted it as if it was an extra year, but really it was more concise, meaning Avil Merodach and Nebuchadnezzar. In other words, again, if you look at Belshazzar's count, he counted 45 and 23, and then the 2 of his, and with that he got to saying, it must be the third year of my reign is when it should have happened, and it didn't, and therefore, the Jews are clearly not coming back. But he messed up, and really 45 and 23 were combined into one, and that, right, meaning they drop a year. So it really, when he ruled in his second year, that really wasn't the time yet. And when Daryavish came, it was really the 70, according to Belshazzar, really happened in Daryavish's time once Belshazzar wasn't king anymore, because he also messed up in his count. Not only messed up when he started his count, he messed up with the count because he didn't realize that these 2 years there was an overlap and they really should only be counted as one. So that proves what we just said about Avil Merodach and Nebuchadnezzar having an overlap of one of the years. Amar Rav, Af Daniel ta'abahai chushbana. Daniel also got confused by the whole count. Dichtiv. Bishnat echad l'malcho. I'll read you the whole verse. It doesn't appear here, the whole verse, but I'll read you the whole thing. In chapter 9, pasuk, the second verse in Daniel, it says, Bishnat echad l'malcho, ani Daniel binoti b'sfarim. In the first year of his rule, I, Daniel, started looking into the books or the numbers. Mispar hashanim asher hayad v'Hashem al Yirmiyahu hanavi l'malot lecharvot Yerushalayim 70 shana. Notice he's the one who says, to fulfill, this is what I said before, 70 years from the destruction. So he also, now they're going to say like this, He must have originally gotten confused, and that's why it says binoti. Litbonein means he had to really study it because he realized there was something not right here about the years. Now we get back to what I mentioned before, which is in any case, there's some difficulty in the verse. K'tiv in Yirmiyahu, it says milot lebavel. Uktiv lecharvot Yerushalayim. Is it to Babylonia or is it to the destruction of Jerusalem? So Amarava lipkida ba'alma. There is something that's counted from Lebavel. Belshazzar wasn't totally off. He said we're going to count from Nebuchadnezzar's rule. Really, there was something counted from there. If you count 70 years from there, we already said you get to Daryavish. Here we're going to have again a little bit of tzimtzum of years and really get to Koresh, okay, which was right after Daryavish. And he says, V'hainu dichtiv kol amar Hashem Koresh melech Paras kol mamlachot haaretz natan li Hashem elokei hashamayim v'hu pakad alai livnot lo bayit b'Yerushalayim. Right, Koresh, the king of Paras, comes and says, God gave me, remember we said this was a bit of an exaggeration. He didn't really rule over the whole world, but he said, God gave me all the world to rule over. Hu pakad alai, and he commanded me to build them a house in Jerusalem. So when he came in, he basically allows the Jews to go back. And that really was the 70 counted from Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, now they're going to say, Tarash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda. Now, what happened there? Why didn't that work out? And what was Koresh wrong about? So, Darash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda, Mai dachtiv ko amar Hashem lemishicho, lekoresh asher chazachti bimino. This is what God said to his Mashiach, right? Mashiach, Messiah. And then it says to Koresh asher chazachti bimino, that I held in my right hand. Is Koresh the Mashiach? Koresh, Mashiach, what do you mean? Is Koresh the Mashiach? That doesn't make any sense. Right, first of all, we know the Mashiach is supposed to come from the family of David. Koresh wasn't even Jewish. Okay, you're missing something. Amar Hashem lemishicho, comma, open quotes. God said to the Mashiach. Okay, now this is an indicator that was really the time was ripe for the Mashiach to come. And the Mashiach was supposed to come, but something went wrong. So God says to the Mashiach, Kovel ani lecha al Koresh. I'm very upset with Koresh. I'm going to complain to you about it. Ani amarti hu yivne beiti v'yikabetz galuyotai. I told him, you're the one who's supposed to rebuild the temple and gather in all the people from all over. V'hu amar, what did Koresh say? Mi bachem mikol amo v'ya'al. Whoever wants to can come do it. Basically, Koresh gave an open invitation, but he didn't join the building. God wanted him to also be involved in the building and take charge of it. But he didn't take ownership. He just said, whoever wants to can come. And we saw this somewhere else recently about someone who kind of said, you can do it, but didn't actually, this was Hoshea ben Elah we saw. Now it came into my head. Remember, he opens the gates, right? The block, there were roadblocks for the Jews not to get to the temple. He opened them, but he didn't exactly get everybody to go. He just said, if you want to, you can. Kind of the same idea of Koresh, right? God doesn't like that when you just kind of say, oh yeah, sure. Whatever you want. That's not the way it is. This is what you should be doing. So therefore, that wasn't good enough. Okay. Now it's true. They could go if they wanted to. I like that Gita about people who can't come to Israel now. Okay. Chel paras umadai apartimim. Okay. Every time we get to a pasuk, I'm going to read the whole verse because then we're going to darshan a lot of it. So we said Bishnat Shalosh L'Macho. That was the whole before, which was on the third year. Right? What did we say? Achashverosh did his count. Got to the third year, he said, the Jews aren't back. Okay, now I can take out the kelim from the temple, right? And I'm going to use them. Clearly, the Jews aren't going back. Then, he makes a party for all of his officers and workers. Okay, the army of Paras and Madai, the noblemen, the Partimim are the noblemen. And the heads, the officers of the different countries in front of him. So Chel Paras Umadai Partimim. The first problem is going to be that at the end of the Megillah, it says, and anything else you want to know is written in Divrei Hayamim L'Machei Madai Uparas. Now here, notice in the first verse in the Megillah, it says, Chel Paras Umadai Partimim. The word Partimim is next to Madai. In this verse, it says L'Machei Madai Uparas. The Milachim are describing the Midim, okay? The people from Medes. So there's the Madai Partimim and the Madai who are the Melachim, the kings. Are they the kings or are they the noble? Some people say it's unclear what exactly the contradiction or the question is here. Some people say it's that one says Paras or Madai and one says Madai or Paras. And why is the order different in each one? So Amarav, it's Nuye Atnu Bahadade. Okay, this is what we call in Israel a unity government. Okay, they made a plan, a unity government. They said, here's our deal. If you're going to rule, you're going to be king, right? The Persian said to the Medes, if you're going to be the king, then we're going to have our officers, right? The Salim, right? The cabinet members or something are going to be from our team. And if it's the reverse, right? We'll be kings, you'll be the Salim. So that's why it switched. In the time of the Megillah, the Madai were the Partamim because the king was from Persia. But when it talks about it's written in the books, the Chronicles, it's talking about a previous time, which there the Malchei Paras were the kings. Or the kings were, the kings were from Medes and not from Persia. Okay, now we're up to the next pasuk. I'll read it inside. So the king wanted to show off his glory. Okay, and he does this in all the great things he had, many days, 180 days. So what was he showing off? Kvod malchuto. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina. Melamed. Remember, he said he used the utensils and the things from the temple. What did he use? He also used the Kohen Gadol's clothing. He wore it. That was the way he showed his kavod. How do we know that? Because he wanted to show off his glory, right? It said, Osher kavod malchuto and tiferet gedulato. Where else do we see kavod and tiferet? Uktiv hatam, by the bigdei kuna, the clothing of the Kohen, it says, lichavod ulitiferet. Right? They are for respect and glory. So there you see the same wording is used. It must be he wore the clothes of the Kohen Gadol. So now what happens? He makes this big party for everybody in the whole kingdom for 180 days. The next verse says, when those days were over, okay, so I'll read all the words, I'll explain, and then we'll have a drasha on them one by one. When those days were finished, he makes a party for everybody in Shushan. That's where he lived. Okay, so first he does it for everyone in all the other countries, all the important people. Then he makes it for everybody in Shushan. And then it says where he did it for 7 days in the Chatzar Ginat Bitan HaMelech. Okay, that's in the courtyard of the garden of the palace of the king. Soon we're going to see that it seems like these are actually describing not the courtyard of it's not what we call smichud in Hebrew, which is the courtyard of the garden of the palace. He did it in the courtyard, in the garden, and in the palace, and we'll see why. 3 different interpretations. So the first thing we're going to explain is, why did he first make a party? Was it a good thing? Was it smart that he made a party first for everybody else and then for the people of Shushan, or was it a stupid thing to do? So Rav Ushmuel, Machloket Rav and Shmuel, Chan Amar Melech Pikech Hayai, he was a very smart king. Chan Amar Melech Tipesh Hayai, he was really not a very smart king at all. Manda Amar Melech Pikech Hayai, if you say he was very smart, Shapir Avid Dikarav Ruchika Beresha, he was very smart. First, he took care of all the people that were far away and brought them closer to him. He said, let me make you a party. Then, Dibnei Mate, the people of his city, they're always near him. He can always deal with them later. So first deal with what's harder to deal with. That's the people far away, and get them on your side. But Manda Marti Peshaya, the one who said this is a really bad idea, right? Not very strategically smart. He should have brought the people in his city first. If the far people decide, we don't really like you, we don't want to really be part of it, and they rebel against him, well, who's going to support him? People of his city will say, hey, you didn't invite us to the party. They're not going to want to support. So this is, the idea. First strengthen what you have your hold on already, and then you can go further out and venture out. So it wasn't such a smart idea to leave out the people of the city and have them be upset that he didn't invite them to this party. That wasn't a smart plan. Here we have an interesting, from a perspective of teacher-student interactions, this is an interesting story. So the students asked Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, why were the Jews deserving of being destroyed and wiped out in this time, right? Why did God decree first, before he saved them? First, it was decreed, Haman decreed that he was going to kill all the Jews. Obviously, God was part of that. What did they do wrong that they deserved that? Amar lahem, so what is the best answer a teacher can give to a student? Imru latem, why don't you tell me? Okay, so he throws it back at them. Amru lo, they said to him, Mipnei shenehenu, now we know why this is here. Mipnei shenehenu misuido shel oto rasha. It must be because they participated in his party and there were inappropriate things that went on, and that must have been their mistake. Now, how do we know the Jews participated? Because he invited everybody in Shushan, and there were Jews in Shushan, so they were obviously part of the party. Im ken shebeshushan yehargu shebechol haolam al yehargu. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, not a good answer, because that would only affect the Jews in Shushan. All the Jews were going to be wiped out, but the only ones where you see all the Jews joining the party, that was in Shushan only. It says he invited everyone, Lemigadol Vad Katan. In the other party, it was just the officers and important people. So that can't be it. So what do the students say to him? Amrulo and moratas. Okay, well, we tried. We didn't have a good answer. Now it's your turn. You tell us. Amar lahem mipnei shishtachavu litzelem, because they bowed to an idol. Okay, now you might think this is Haman, but they say, no, this wasn't Haman, because then you would have the same problem. Only the Jews in Shushan bowed to Haman, not everybody. So it must be there was another case where previously they must have bowed to an idol, and therefore, because of that, they were punished. So Amrulo, and this is in an earlier time in history. Amrulo, wait a minute, they said to him, right? Classic. So the teacher gives his answer, but now the students have a question on the teacher. Say, wait, if they really worshiped idols, then they're deserving of death. But what happened in the end? In the end, God redeemed them. They didn't die. So how could God be nosei panim? How could he, kind of ignore this in the end and save them if they really worshiped idols? Amar lahem. So he said to them, Hem lo asu ela lifanim. They just did it on the exterior. They weren't really believing in idols. They did it because the Gentiles forced them to. They didn't really believe in it. So it was just from the outside. If it was from the inside, they really meant it, it would be a problem. But they only did it on the outside, and they say something very smart. God also only did it from the outside. Now, God made it look like he was going to destroy them, but in the end, he didn't, right? Both of them were just to show face. That's why lepanim, for face. Like they did it to kind of say, oh, look, we're worshiping idols. And God did to say, look, you should be deserving death for this. But in the end, we know you really didn't do it wholeheartedly, and therefore you're not. This is a difficult pasuk to see the connection. There's a few different interpretations. Ki lo ina milibo. Okay, so the rest of this pasuk is ki hege ish. Vayaga b'nei ish. So what they say this means is lo ina milibo. Again, there's different interpretations, whether it's talking about God or whether it's talking about them. Let's say it's talking about the Jewish people. Lo ina milibo. They didn't do it really with their hearts. And therefore, vayaga b'nei ish, that God kind of raised up the people and didn't kill them. Now we get back to this threesome that we talked about. Was the party in the courtyard? Was it in the Gina, in the garden, or was it in the palace? Rav Shmuel. So first we're going to see a machlokah Rav and Shmuel, then we'll see a braita about it as well. Three interpretations. Chadamal. So first two, Rav and Shmuel. One said, Hara'oi lechatzer lechatzer, Hara'oi legina legina, Hara'oi lebitan lebitan. He split up all the people by levels. If you were more important, you got into the palace. If you were less important, you went into the garden. If you were even less important, you were put in the courtyard, right? It's like the cheap seats and the right at a game or at a theater. There's levels, okay? And he split the people up into levels. We'll see one of the problems with saying this interpretation further down. B'charamal, hoshibam b'chatzir v'lo achziktan, bagina v'lo achziktan, ad shechnisan lebitan v'achziktan. He really wanted an outdoor party, not because it was COVID and there were restrictions, but he wanted the party to be outdoors. He probably didn't want to have people in his courtyard, in his palace, right? You have a party, you're the king. You don't really want to bring everybody inside. So he put them outside, but there were too many people. So he had to bring some people inside. Then there were too many people that filled up also the Gina, the garden. So then he finally brought people into his palace. So kind of reluctantly, it's saying, number one, he didn't really want them in his house. Number two, what it's showing is how many people showed up, right? There were masses of people who came to this party. Next, in a braita, though, it says, he put them in the courtyard, but he opened two doors. This is a different way of, like a different approach of a king. He wants to show off his whole palace. So he doesn't want the party in the palace, but he opens the doors and says, listen, the party's in the courtyard, but go make yourself at home, go look around, go see all, and it fits Ahasuerus. He wants to show off everything he has. Go, you can look at my palace, you can look in my garden. Okay, so three different approaches to why these three things are mentioned. Again, the simple reading is that it was in the courtyard of the garden of the palace, and that it's really just describing one place. Chor karpas utchelet. Okay, now we get into all the decorations and the things that were around, okay, that he had at the party. I'll read the whole pasuk. He had chor karpas utchelet, achuz bechevle boots, vargaman, al galile. This is all different materials. Al galile kesef, amude shesh. Okay, there were all these different materials all around of items. Mitot zahav chesef, they were golden and silver beds. We're going to try to figure out what were they gold or were they silver? What's going on here? And the floors were made of also these different materials. We're going to have to see what some of them are. What is dar and socharet? We're not going to darshan everything here, but we're going to darshan some of them. Chor karpasu tchelet. My chor. What is chol? What does it come from? The root. Rav amar chare chare. It was a material that, like, there were these curtains or material that was like lace. It had holes in it. Right, very pretty. Shmuel Amar, and that comes from chor, is a hole. Shmuel says, no, chor milashon chiver is pale, white. So he says it was melat levana hitziala, and he gave them this very fine white wool. Karpas, right? This isn't karpas that we dip on Pesach. What's karpas? Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, karim shel pasim. There were pillows with stripes on them. Al galile kesef amude shesh mitot zahav chesef. So now we want to know about the gold and silver, and here we're going to have something similar to before. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda omer haraoy lekesef haraoy lezahav lezahav. He differentiated between different people. If you were a certain level, you got to sit on. Remember, the beds weren't for sleeping. The beds were what they ate on, right? Like the Roman and the Greco-Roman. There was ate on these beds. So they say, if you were of a higher level, you got a golden one. If you were of a lower level, you got a silver one. Amar Rabbi Nechemia, and here we're going to see the problem with doing that, which is the same as the problem with earlier, with where you sat at the party. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Amar Rabbi Nechemia Im Kana Tamatil Kina B'Seuda. You can imagine a whole fight breaking out at the party. If you get the gold and I have silver, I'll say, oh, what, that's not fair. I want the gold, and it would be a whole fight erupted. That's not a good thing to do at a party. You want everybody to be equal. The beds were silver, but the legs of the bed were gold. It reminds us of that story of Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, who got the golden leg. Remember, it came down from the heavens. Similar. Okay. Bahat vashesh. Amar Rabbi Asi, avanim shemitchatetot al ba'alehen. It's Bahat, like mitchotetot. What's that? These are stones that people search for in the ground, right? These are precious stones that you find, right, in different places, and people are always searching for them. V'cheinu omer, how do you know that stones are things that people search for and that these are what we're talking about? Avnei nezer min nosisot al admato, that the stones are in the ground, and then basically people go find them. V'dar v'socharet. So what is dar and socharet? What are the roots? And we're going to connect these roots in three different ways. Rav Amar dare dare. Dar is a dare dare is rows. There were rows of these stones, and socharet means, it doesn't say this, but the commentaries say what he means is, and they were put around, because chor is to go around. Ushmuel Amar even tova yesh b'karchei hayam v'darashma was a certain type of stone called the dara. Hoshiva be'emtza seuda, you would put it in the middle of, right, like kind of a centerpiece at the table. Umeira lahem kitzoraim, and it lit it up like afternoon. Where do we get afternoon from? Well, if you take samach of socharet and you switch it with sadi, because samach and sadi sound very similar, so you can switch them in the worlds of drasha and also even the way words develop. Sometimes they get switched, and chet and hey often get switched. So if you switch that to that, you'll have tzohoraim, okay? Or tzoharet, which is like tzohoraim, which is afternoon. Tibei Rabbi Yishmael Tana, shekara dror lecho ba'alei schora. Dar and socharet, dar is dror, freedom. Schora is business people. He basically lowered taxes, okay? As opposed to at the end of the Megillah, where he raises the taxes, he lowered the taxes and made it, right, caused freedom, right, like a free market where all the taxes are lower and the business people win out. This we always say to the tune of Echa, because the kelim shonim is a reference to he was using the kelim from the temple that were stolen from the temple. So now we'll read that pasuk. The end of that pasuk we'll get to soon, which is Yem Malchut Rav Ki Yad HaMelech, and there was the wine of the kingdom was great, like the hand of the king. We'll see what that means. Okay. First, they say kelim shonim, something's weird, which is mishunim mebayle. Different should be mishuneh. Shonim has a connotation of not just, we actually use shoneh in modern Hebrew, But right, mishuneh is more like strange. But to them, mishuneh is different. And shonim is like lishanen, which is to repeat. He did something a second time. So it doesn't make sense to say the kelim were a second time, so they're going to darshan it. Amar Rava yatzta bat kol v'amra lahem, rishonim kalu mipnei kelim v'atem shonim bahem. Remember what Belshazzar did. Each of them, the whole thing was the 70 years. They calculated, and then they said, oh, we can use the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash. So basically he says, if that's the case, he says, I'm going to use the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash, to which they say, what do you mean? Belshazzar made the same mistake, and he was killed. What are you doing? You're playing with fire, right? You're about to do something that might kill you. And he doesn't get killed, but Vashti gets killed. Everyone was given wine that was older than they were, okay? That's how amazing the wine was, right? We all know aged wine is considered a good thing. That's what it means. Rav, it was very old. Vashtiya chadat ein ones. My chadat, what does it mean the shtia is kidat? That sounds like religion, right? And maybe Jewish religion. So what do they mean by that? So they say, Amar Rabbi Elazar, I skipped. Amar Rabbi Hanan, Mishum Rabbi Meir, Kadat Shel Torah, like the way the Torah says it, Ma Dat Shel Torah, Achila Meruba Mishtiya, Af Sudato Shel Torah Sha, Achila Meruba Mishtiya. Just like eating, okay, just like in the Jewish religion, eating is more important than drinking. What does this mean? So Rashi says this means that when in the world of korbanot, if you remember, we learned about korbanot, they talk about it as Achilat Mizbeach, the altar eats the food, okay? So when you get to the Torah laws, how much do we bring of wine? We bring wine and we bring food, meat. But obviously there's way more meat brought than wine. The wine is secondary. And, between the meat and the mincha offerings, the meal offerings, that's all food. There's a little bit of wine that gets poured, but that's not so significant. So likewise, this party was mostly food and a little bit of drink. Even though you always think of this as a big party, right now we're going to have two statements that seem to say that Achashverosh actually wanted to limit the wine because he saw that getting drunk might lead to problems. Amar Rabbi Elazar melamed shekol echad ve'echad ishkeu. Ein ones. I skipped that word. Ein ones. What does it mean? Ein ones. Nothing was forced. Amar Rabbi Elazar melamed shekol echad ve'echad ishkeu miyen medinato. Okay, everyone was given their own wine. This sounds like how Esther looked to everyone like one of theirs. Their wine also, it was kind of everybody got the wine from their own country. This is also to limit drunkenness because if you're used to a wine, your body's used to it. You don't get drunk so easily. If you're not used to a wine, if it's a new wine, it will affect you more. Lasot kirtzon ish va'ish. Amarava, lasot kirtzon ha-Mordechai v'Haman. Okay, who's this ish va'ish? Lasot kirtzon ish va'ish, so everyone does as they please, which is the way you would simply read it, but it sounds like there's two men. Who are the two men? This is the rabbi's attempt, right, to deal with the issue that you don't hear of Haman and Mordechai till chapter 3. And there's a whole thing we're going to see that some people think the Megillah, you're only supposed to start reading it in chapter 3 because the whole beginning isn't so relevant to the story. Obviously, it's the pre, but it's not really so relevant. You don't see any of our main characters other than Achashverosh. So basically they say, no, we're going to put them into the early part of the Megillah as well. Okay, and they were the ish va'ish. How do you know that Mordechai and Haman are the ish? Because Mordechai dechtiv ish Yehudi, Haman dechtiv ish sar va'oyev. They're both called an ish in the Megillah, so therefore this ish va'ish must be a reference to Mordechai and Haman that they were at the party as well. Okay, next. Gam bashti hamalka asta mishteh. Oh, by the way, yafeh. I forgot to say this. Kirtzon Mordechai ve'Esther, Rashi says, Hema yusarei hamashkim b'mashteh. What does it mean? They were, right, exactly as you're saying, they were the waiters at the event. That's what it means. Kirtzon ish va'ish. They were the ones who were the bartenders, basically. Gam vashti hamaka asta mishteh nashim beit hamalchut. Again, I just want to point out, because I see your question, what he was the waiter. And this isn't right now, this is not meant to be understood literally, these midrashim. Just like, right, we're going to see tomorrow, Esther Yurak Roka Taita, she was green, and are you supposed to understand that literally what she was green, So these aren't meant to be understood literally. Again, what are they trying to do? They're trying to find a way to get Haman and Mordechai already in the beginning of the story and to say this story started even earlier, and it's what's interesting about it. If you think about it, what's the idea? They were equal at that point, right? They were both in the same position. They were both working for the king. And then look what happened to them. They started as waiters. And as I'm just coming up with possible ways to understand what the rabbis are doing. They started as waiters and worked their way up. They were equal. They were together. And then, they kind of split and end up becoming, arch enemies. Anyway, there's things to be thought about this. Now it says also Vashti made a party. Now we always think of Vashti making a party. She had her party, he had his party. They were very separate. But the Gemara points out something very important here. Beit HaNashim, she should have been in the house of the women. It's the men had their party, the women had their party, but not in the same place. But what does it say in the verse? She did it in Beit HaMalchut, in the king's palace. This shows that Vashti already from the beginning also intended some bad things. In other words, he wanted to show her off and she wanted to show herself off. Okay, we're going to have to see how this comes about because in the end she refuses. But really, she wanted to show her body off just as much as he wanted to show her off. And that's why she did her party where his party was going on. Okay, funny line. The husband with his gourd and the woman with her zucchinis. Okay, I think the idea is that a husband and a wife often have similar intents, similar, a little bit different, right? But zucchinis and gourds are all from the same family, and they must have had the same idea. Okay, right? In our house, it always comes up, right? Well, we must be married because he said something that I exactly said the same thing, and we have the same things in mind. So that's next time that happens in your house, you can use this line, right? So remember it. Right? In the words of the Gemara, he had this. I don't think it was in tomorrow's stuff, but this idea that someone didn't know something and they repeated it 40 times. So repeat it 40 times and then you'll remember it next time it happens in your house. Okay. On the seventh day, when the king already got kind of inebriated from the wine, so the Gemara asks, why on the seventh day? What? Until then he wasn't drunk? Amarava, Yom HaShvi'i Shabbat Hayam. When you see Yom HaShvi'i, what do you think? Right? You think of Shabbat. It must have been Shabbat. Why Shabbat? Well, Shabbat is when you have the most stark contrast between Jews and Gentiles. Okay, that's the idea, right? During the week, we all kind of do similar things, but on Shabbat, we have a whole different way of doing things. So here we're going to see what's their contrast here. Sheyisrael ochlim v'shotin matchilim b'divrei Torah b'divrei tishbachot. Right? What do Jews do on Shabbat? They eat and drink, and after they're a little bit, we're not exactly drunk, but they drink a little, they feel good. What do? They start saying Divrei Torah and praises of God. So now they say, but when they start eating and drinking, what do? They start with silly things, and they say things that are nonsensical. So what happened here? What was the conversation that went on? Instead of Divrei Torah and Tishbachot, this was the conversation. Halalu omrim madiot naot. Halalu omrim parsiot naot. Right? You have the Medes saying, our women are the most beautiful. And the Persians saying, our women are the most beautiful. Amar lachem Achashverosh. Kli she'ani mishtamesh bo ein lo madi v'lo parsi ela kasti. The vessel that I use, okay, if you talk about objectifying women, this is, right, the most objectifying. He calls her a kli, okay, a vessel. The vessel that I use, mamash, objectifying her. The vessel that I use, and by the way, I'll get to that in a minute, but it's not madi, it's not parsi, it's bavli. Now, what was he using? He was using Vashti, who was Babylonian, but also I think it's a reference to the kelim. He was using the kelim that the Babylonians stole from the Jews. And maybe it's also a reference to, both he took her from the Bavlim and he took the kelim also of the Jewish people from the Bavlim. Anyway, he says, what I have is Babylonian, Ritzonchem Lirota, right? She's the most beautiful of everyone. Would you like to see her? Amrulo, im, they said yes. But notice here, who says this? Ubilvat shetei aruma. So they said to him, yes, but only if you bring her out naked. It was their idea. It wasn't his suggestion. But he's silly enough to take their suggestion. And then why was she asked to come naked? This was a punishment to her. What was the punishment? Right? This is what we call midah keneged midah. You get what you deserve. She would take young Jewish girls and make them strip down naked and make them work on Shabbat. And that's why she was punished. She had to come naked on Shabbat in front of all the people. Obviously, I don't think she cared that it was Shabbat, but that's what they're saying. This happened on Shabbat to remind us of this. And how do we have a reference to this in the Megillah? This is all careful reading and where you have, whether you take their explanation or don't take their explanation, they're at least showing you difficulties in the text that lead to these explanations, which is right after he already, right, his anger subsided, and then Zachar et Vashti, he remembers Vashti. Now here's the important part of the verse here. Ve'et asher asata, and what she did, ve'et asher nigzar aleha. Now the simple reading is, what did she do? That she wouldn't come naked. But in essence, she really didn't do anything, right? She didn't come. So asher asata, they say, must be she did something before that, which is she made the Jewish girls work naked on Shabbos. Kach nigzar aleha. And that's right, et asher asata ve'et asher nigzar, what she did that caused her to be destined to die, to be killed. But tima'en hamalka Vashti. So now she refuses to come. We all know this. Now the Gemara is going to ask, wait a minute, based on what we said earlier, right? Why did she care? The whole thing was she wanted to show herself off. Right? We already said that both of them, or now they're quoting a verse that a comment that somebody made, they were both intending for Dvar Averan. Now you could very simply say, right, a woman reading this says, obviously she wouldn't want to come naked, she might want to show off her beauty, but not without any clothes on. But anyway, the Gemara assumes that was her intent as well. My time aloate, so why didn't she come? This is very famous, that this midrash gets quoted a lot, right? That she had leprosy all of a sudden. So she didn't want to come because she looked awful. B'manitatan, in a Braita, it says something else, or also very famous. Gabriel made a tail grow on her, and therefore she didn't want to go out. She was embarrassed of the tail. Now it says the king got very angry at her. Now, Yiksov HaMelech would have been enough. Why ma'od? Why was he so angry? So why was he so angry? So now they said there's this conversation that went on between them. First, she sends him a message, right? She didn't talk to him directly. He calls for her. She sends a message back. Bar Hadurari, I have a hard time reading this word. Ahurarayai, right? I don't know. I can't read it. But anyway, you can read the word yourself. De'aba, okay? You're like the son of the horse of my father, meaning you're a nobody. My father was a king and you're like a nobody compared to him. Abba, why? Abba lekabel alfa chamra shate v'lo rave. My father would have 1,000 cups of wine and never get drunk. Vahu gavra ishate b'chamre, and you got totally drunk with your wine, right? She starts insulting him. Besides, she doesn't show up, and that's why he got really angry. She totally insults him and says, right, you're not as good as my father, the king. That's like the worst thing to be saying, basically. And she calls him like a bumbling idiot because he's drunk. So he immediately gets very angry from the insult. Now we have two interesting psukim, okay? So first the king goes to the chachamim, yodei ha'itim, which we'll have to explain. They know the times. What does that mean? Who are these chachamim? Because this is what he normally does. And then it says, V'karov elav, and the closest to him, Karshana Shetar Admata Tarshish, Meres Marsena Memuchan, Shiv'at Sarei Parasu Madai, Ro'ei Pnei HaMelech Yoshvim Rishana B'Malchut, right? And then so then he goes to those 7. It sounds like first he went to a group of Chachamim. Then he goes to those 7, and then Memuchan comes forward and gives the suggestion of what to do. We know the famous that Memuchan is Haman. We'll get to that inside in a minute. So, of course, if you're a rabbi and you see that he goes to the Chachamim, who are the Chachamim? It must be the rabbis. Man Chachamim Rabbanit. So now we have to see, well, why didn't the rabbis answer him in the end? And why does he then go to the other 7 people who are clearly not Jewish? You can tell by their names. And why are they called Yodei Ha'itim? This goes back to some Gemaras we learned previously, some Masechtot. Sheyodim la'ber shanim l'kbo chadashim, right? Masechet Rosh Hashanah. This is what the rabbis do. They're the ones who determine the times. They decide when it's supposed to be a leap year, when it's not, right? When the months are supposed to be. So he says, judge me, tell me, judge her for me. Okay, what should we do? They said to themselves, wait a minute, we're going to be in a quandary here. What should we tell him? Okay, one option is to say, kill her. Tomorrow, his anger is going to subside, his drunkenness is going to subside, he's going to be sober, and he's going to want her back. And then we're going to be in trouble that we killed her. But if we say leave her be and don't do anything, well, but he wants us to do something because she disgraced the kingdom. So what do they say? They start making excuses. Listen, from the time the temple was destroyed, when we were kicked out of our land, we no longer have the power to really give good decisions. We can no longer judge dinei nefashot. This is known that Once they're not in the Beit HaMikdash, they don't do Dinei Nefashot anymore, so it connects with halacha. Zil legabe Ammon u'Moav, go to Ammon and Moab, diyatve v'duchtai, what's unique about them? Go ask them, because they're still living in their place they were. They never got exiled. Kechamer diyativ ar dordei, they're like a donkey living in its home. Vitama amrule, and the reason why they said this, in other words, on what basis did they say this? Well, there's a verse to prove this. Sha'anan Moab minurav, they're peaceful from their youth. Vishoketu al shmarav, v'lo hurak mikli al keli, ubagola lo halach, al ken amad hamo bo v'rechono lo namar. Okay, it basically says they never got sent anywhere else, and therefore they still have their wits about them, and therefore they're the best people. So miyad v'karov elav karshana shetar ad mata tarshish, etc. Amar Levi, kol pasuk zeh al shum korbanot ne'ema. They're now going to say, you think these names don't have any connection to us? They do. Each name is a reference to something in the temple, and it represents the following. Karshana. Amru malachei hasharet lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is all a conversation the angels have with God, and they say to him, Ribbono shel olam, klum ikrivu lefanecha karim b'nei shana kederech shekrivu Yisrael lefanecha. This is a way of waking up God and saying, help the Jewish people. What? Did they give? Now, Karshana is an abbreviation for karim b'nei shana. Did they bring you sheep that are a year old for sacrifices like the Jews did? No. Sheital, shtei torim, sheital, shtei torim. Did they bring you 2 birds as sacrifices? No. Admata, klum banu lefanecha mizbach adama. Did they build an altar from the ground? Tarshish, klum shimshu lefanecha b'bigdei kuhuna, tichtibu tarshish v'sham v'yashpa. Of the stones on the Kohen Gadol's clothes was Tarshish. Did they use bigdei kuhuna? No. Meres, klumer, subadam lefanecha. Meres is to mix the blood. Did they mix the blood from the sacrifices? No. Marsina, klumer, suba menachot lefanecha. Did they mix the batter of the meal offerings? No. Mimuchan, klumi chinu shulchan lefanecha. Did they make a table for you with lechem apanim, the showbread on it? No. Vayomer mimuchan. Tana, mimuchan ze Haman. Okay, this is the famous, that was already Haman. Again, same thing, an attempt to bring Haman into the story earlier and already show his evil nature, as opposed to before he was just a waiter, but then he rises up. Right? He was ready for, to attack. Right? The simple person, because he was the last of the 7, he's the one who usually goes, right? He jumps forward first. That's what you see from here. Now, Achashverosh does something very foolish, and they say that's going to save the Jewish people in the end. He sends out this letter to everyone and says, this is my rule. Everybody has to be in charge in their own house, right, over their wives. If it weren't for this letter, we would have been destroyed immediately. When he sent out the second letter to destroy the Jewish people on the 13th of Adar, they would have just started destroying us right away if they took his igrot seriously. But because he sent just a silly letter, they didn't take it seriously. Okay, why was this such a silly letter? Pshita, the people said, why is he sending this? Obvious, we're all in charge in our own household, right? You would say today, maybe it's the opposite. But to them, this was so obvious because that's the way things were. It's always fun when they have these quips. Even a weaver in his house, who's like the lowliest of the low, he's, right, if he's a weaver outside, in his house, he's still king, basically, right? He's in charge. So now it says he puts up these people in charge to gather all the Na'arot Betulot. He wants to find a new queen. Now, why does he have to put up people in charge? Wouldn't you think people would be dying to become the queen? So we're going to see now a contrast between him and David. When David is very sick at the end of his life, they look to find a Na'ara Betulah for him. Okay, so someone who's prudent will do things wisely, but someone who's foolish will kind of, mess himself up. Okay, and he was really looking for one woman. So everyone who had a daughter wanted this job because it was a very respectable job. You'll kind of ruin his plans, the foolish ones. Why did he, right? Why weren't they running to do this? Everybody was hiding. Nobody wanted this. Why? Because instead of, this beauty pageant where he chooses one woman, he slept every single night with each woman. Nobody wanted to offer their daughters to get raped by the king every night. So, or whatever once. So because of that, that's the contrast between him and David. And we'll end with this issue, right? Whereas Shmuel, Mordechai, Ben Yair, Ben Shimi, Ben Kish, Ishimini. So the first thing is, why the genealogy? We get a very cut genealogy. It's this one and that one. It's not father to father. It's father, grandfather. It skips generations, and it doesn't go all the way back to Binyamin. So my kama, why are they telling you this? If they just want to say, to where did he belong, what family? It should have gone all the way to Binyamin. It should have said all the names. Why did it skip? And why did it not even go to Binyamin? Why these particular? It's to darshan these names. Tana, Kulan al Shmoni Kru, Ben Yair, Ben Sheir, Nehem Shli Yisrael b'tfilato. Yair, because he lit up the Jewish people with his prayers. Ben Shimi, Ben Sheshama el tfilato. God heard his prayers. That's why Shimi. Ben Kish, Shei Kish, that means to knock, al Sharei Rachamim v'niftechulo. He knocked on the gates of mercy and he was answered. This all has to do with prayer of Mordechai. Kare le Yehudi. Okay, now we're going to have a question with 4 answers. 2 answers we'll see today, 2 answers in tomorrow's daf. It calls him a Yehudi. Now, Yehudi we normally think of as Jewish, but in those days, Yehudi meant you were from Judea, that tribe. Alma mi Yehuda ka'ate. Kare le Yemini, Alma mi Binyamin ka'ate. He's Yemini, which sounds like from Binyamin. He's Yehudi, which sounds like it's from Yehuda. Which one is it? Amar Nachman, Mordechai Mukhtar b'ni Muso haya, which means Amar Rabba Bar Barchan, Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Yoshua ben Levi, Aviv mi Binyamin v'imo mi Yehuda. Because he came from 2 very important families, prominent families, both the kings came from them, Shaul and David. So they called him, his mother was from Yehuda, his father was from Binyamin, so he's basically called by both. Rabbanan said, no, he didn't come from Yehuda at all. It's just that Yehuda claimed responsibility for him. If David he killed Shlomi ben Gera, who Mordechai was descended from, Shimi ben Gera cursed David, and David didn't kill him. If he killed him, Mordechai never would have been born. So it's because of us that he's here. Mishpacha Binyamin amra minai ka'ate. Binyamin says, what do you mean? Came from us. It's because of us that he's here. So there was a fight. The next one, Rabba, which we're only going to start now, is Knesset Yisrael amra le'idach kisa. Ruma sa liyudi u'mashilem liyemini. The Jewish people said, no, it's Binyamin's fault, it's Yehuda's fault. This isn't a positive thing. They're both responsible for the fact that this story happened. And we're going to see that in tomorrow's daf, why each one is responsible for the whole story happening. And that's why he's called Yehudi and Binyamini. So we'll see, as I said, 2 more answers in tomorrow's daf. Have a Shabbat Shalom and a great day, everybody.